Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast, where on this podcast, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about sleep because on the 8th of March, we are going to lose an hour of sleep with daylight savings time, and sleep is a foundational component to that plan I talked about in the last podcast. If you haven't listened to that, please go back and listen to it, as it'll be helpful in understanding how we think through headaches and migraines. But on today's podcast, we're going to talk about sleep. Sleep is one of those things that people all over the internet, really just all over the world, but when you look on the internet, there's all sorts of things that are trying to help people with sleep. Just yesterday, I went to Costco and bought some Breathe Right strips, and those have been a game changer, which with my own personal sleep, and we do recommend those. But there's all sorts of little gadgets, whether it's different pillows that you've tried, sleep aids, heated blankets, heavy blankets, mattresses. I mean, people invest a lot of money into sleep, and there's a reason for that. So we're going to talk about it in the context of why lack of sleep is so detrimental to your health and impacting your ability to tolerate pain, and why improving sleep and improving quality of sleep is so essential for getting out of this pain cycle. So especially looking forward to daylight savings. As I said earlier, so on this podcast, like I said, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines. I'm your host, Dr. Taves. If that sounds like you, just know that we have offices in Parker, Colorado, and then Colorado Springs. We're kind of trying to hit on that South Denver area, and then in the Colorado Springs area. We do have people that travel from hours away to see us. Actually, a lot of our patients are traveling 45 minutes, 2 hours, something like that. And then we do have a lot of people that travel to see us from out of state. And we have plans for just about everyone, even if you can't travel to see us and you're looking at like virtual coaching, something like that. We want to help you understand this underlying problem. Again, find a plan like I talked about in our last podcast. But if this is you, I'm glad you're here. What I encourage people to do is stick with this podcast for at least 6 months or so, because what you're going to get is sort of a well-rounded understanding of our process and how to think about headaches and migraines. If you just jump in and out of one podcast here or there, you're going to grab some nuggets, but you're going to have pieces of the whole picture. And so I want you to complete the puzzle. So make sure you stick with us. So this podcast specifically is on sleep. So let's talk about sleep. So what are some of the benefits of sleep? So when we think about the quality of sleep, oftentimes what we'll do is we'll just ask people, what is your quality of sleep? Do you wake up feeling rested? That's kind of a key question when we're trying to understand where someone's at when we start with them. And oftentimes, I would say more times than not, people will say their sleep quality is poor. They do not feel rested when they wake up, or they're sort of like questioning if it's normal or not. And a lot of people have never really been able to get into a deep sleep. They've always sort of ran at this level of exhaustion or fatigue that they've normalized in their mind. And the reason that sleep is so important, there's a few things that happen when we sleep. So brain reset. So basically it's our body's way of clearing out any metabolic waste, toxins, things like that. We actually are able to neurologically reset pain sensitivity in a sense. So our threshold for pain will go up. We regulate neurotransmitters in that same sort of line of thinking. And then cell repair and tissue recovery is a big one. So this is where we think of like the growth hormone being released. So the deeper sleep specifically is where we get that. Muscle connective tissue repair. So if we've exercised, if we've lifted weights, if we've done something to push our bodies physically, whether that's the muscle, the tendon, whatever the soft tissue is that's kind of been broken down, this is a good time for that to heal and repair. And then we have poor sleep that would increase inflammatory cytokines. So these are the things that actually send the pain signals to our brain and cause inflammation. So these inflammatory cytokines increase when we have poor sleep. It actually lowers our pain threshold and increases the level of tension that we carry. So think of it like if we're trying to get out of this headache or migraine situation, we want our pain threshold to be as high as possible and we want tension to be as low as possible. And so sleep impacts both of those components, right? So The two main components of you being in pain when you wake up are the signal itself, so the pain signal being sent from the neck, the jaw, the shoulders, and so we'll talk about sleep position, things like that. But then it's also your tolerance to that signal. Now, what's interesting about sleep is that both components can be hit on while you sleep, and you can either improve both, or both are going to be impacted in a negative way. So poor sleep is going to actually increase cortisol levels, decrease serotonin regulation. Serotonin's a big one when we get into the migraine world, and most of the medications are impacting serotonin in some way. It also will heighten central sensitization. So basically, your brain's awareness of a pain signal will go up. It's going to be hypersensitive to it, and then it makes that trigger hit harder. So things like weather, hormones, gut health, the inflammatory food that you eat, those triggers are going to hit harder when you have poor sleep. Okay, so we have the two. We have the signal, the thing that's actually sending the pain signal, and then we have your body's threshold for pain. And so what happens, especially during daylight savings time, is kind of interesting, because when we lose that hour, we see different things like the rhythm, the circadian rhythm. So like your sleep-wake cycle will be disrupted. We see the light exposure shift, right? And so that can throw your body off. The melatonin timing changes. So when your body is going to release or produce melatonin, cortisol spike in the morning as well. And so we see these different physiological changes happen when we basically are losing an hour of sleep. And what we have seen is actually an increase in what they've seen at large, just studies in general, is increased car accidents, cardiac events, workplace injuries, things like that. So sleep is important. It's important for us to function throughout the day. The triggers will hit harder. And then as far as headaches and migraines are concerned, if we're trying to avoid waking up with a headache or migraine, we have to consider these two components, the actual source of pain itself, and then our threshold, right? So there's a couple things that we should consider when it comes to the actual pain itself. So sleep position is a big one. So if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard me talk about the different sleep positions that are going to be beneficial. They're ultimately, back sleeping is the best. Side sleeping is okay. It's a little high maintenance. And then stomach sleeping, I do not recommend. Side sleeping is okay if you're able to hug a pillow and have a good foam pillow under your head. The foam pillow is essential because of the width of your shoulder. So when you're lying on your side, the pillow needs to be supportive enough where your head's not tipping to one side or the other. And then when you're on your side, most people are going to be twisted to an extent that it's actually going to put some stress through your neck. And so what I want you to do is hug a pillow and put one in between your knees. I have this nice little knee cushion pillow, and it works really well. I just put it between my knees, and I don't have this temptation to straighten the bottom leg, bend the top leg, and twist, because you want to avoid that twisting, okay? And then if you're a back sleeper, you're fine. You don't really need a high maintenance pillow. You don't need additional pillows necessarily. Sometimes if you're a back sleeper, you just have to be aware of your airway and if you're able to breathe properly, because sleeping on your back, if you deal with something like sleep apnea, can increase that. But if you do find sleeping on your back, and that's great, stay on your back. Side sleeping is okay with those additional pillows, and then stomach sleeping I would avoid, okay? So sleep position is a big one, just because we don't want to increase the level of tension that your body's carrying as you're sleeping. And then when it comes to threshold, things like, so sleep's going to regulate cortisol levels, blood sugar, emotional reactivity, basically that sympathetic nervous system, the tone of your sympathetic nervous system. One of the things I've talked about in the past is nose breathing and its impact on your parasympathetic nervous system. So basically, when we breathe through our nose, we produce nitric oxide, which is a good vasodilator, and it helps our bodies, our nervous system, get into that rest and digest state, allowing us to get into the deep REM sleep that is required for proper sleep, waking up feeling rested. And so breathing through your nose is essential to getting proper sleep. If you are a mouth breather, I would suggest that you first try just breathing through your nose. So lip sealed, breathe through your nose for 5 minutes. See if you can do that comfortably enough. If you can, that's a good sign. That means that you likely don't have an obstructed airway to the extent where you need to go like get it looked at and put in a plan of care in place, in order to resolve the actual obstruction to the airway. If you can breathe through your nose fine, then you want to encourage that. You want to do whatever you can to make that easier. So that could be the breathe right strips, mouth taping. Sometimes people just develop bad habits where they're breathing through their mouth, not because they can't breathe through their nose, but just because they just naturally want to breathe through their mouth. And so we want to prevent that as best as possible. Like I said, it's going to impact our body's ability to get into that rest and digest, oxygen perfusion, things like that. So physiologically, our threshold is going to be much higher when we get into deep sleep, and then we want to consider the actual position that we're sleeping in. When it comes to the tension that we carry into bed, oftentimes I'll tell people to do 1 or 2 like shoulder, neck type stretches before bed, just so we're not carrying tension into the evening. So a couple tips here as well is you want to protect the morning light. So when you wake up, you want to, within the first 30 to 60 minutes, you want to have sunlight exposure. Okay. That just helps with that circadian rhythm, like telling your brain what daytime looks like. And then you want to reduce the evening blue light. Again, just kind of on the front end, as opposed to the back end when you wake up, but on the front end, when you're going to bed, reduce the blue light within 1 to 2 hours before bed. You want to have a consistent sleep-wake cycle. So especially around daylight savings, when we lose that hour, try to have a consistent schedule when the time you go to bed and then in the time you wake up. And then think in terms of threshold and the source of pain, meaning tension, rather than just like triggers, right? So instead of blaming it on the weather and just saying like, oh, the weather caused me to have this issue, think in terms of like, where is my neck and the stress running through my body? How is that physically? And then what is my threshold at? So what are the negative things that are impacting the body's ability to actually tolerate pain? And so sleep is one of the big ones in this category. Okay. So what I want you to do when March 8 rolls around, if you wake up with a bad migraine, because we do see an increase in the rate of like migraine breakthroughs during this time, I want you to think about your threshold. I want you to think about sleep quality, sleep hygiene. Hopefully you would have listened to this podcast, and then you're able to take action on this instead of just being reactive and blaming it on a trigger. Okay. So that's my podcast for this week. I just got over kind of a stressful week. The last podcast I talked about my son being in the hospital, and so I'm like physically I'm maybe just a touch worn down, and so I need to focus on my sleep personally at home in order to ramp my threshold back up, get my immune system where it should be, and then getting back to it as far as helping you guys understand and manage these headaches and migraines. Because as always, it's our mission on this podcast to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. Again, I'm Dr. Taves. If you found this podcast helpful, I want you to write us a review or share it with someone that you know who would benefit from it, because that will help us push the algorithm forward and get in front of more people. Thanks so much for listening to this podcast, and I will see you next week.